Welcome to Beyond Bandwidth, Leviton's podcast series where we dive into network technology's hottest topics. I am your host from Leviton Network Solutions, Roy Chamberlain. In today's episode, Leviton's Mike Connaughton sits down with Iain Farquharson. Iain is with Red Bear Tech and has a dynamic history with artificial intelligence and data center technology. If you have a passion for AI and data centers, then you will definitely appreciate this conversation.
Hi everyone, Mike Connaughton here again, Senior Product Manager here at Leviton Network Solutions, and welcome to this week's episode of Beyond Bandwidth. And I'm joined today by Iain Farquharson of Red Bear Technologies. Thanks for joining us, Iain.
Hi Mike, thanks for having me.
And I'm hoping it's a little cooler for you in the UK than it is for us on the east coast of the US this week. It's a challenge here, but the air conditioning works. That's good.
Yeah, the topic of cooling is we can never get away with it. Whether from data centers, whether it's the weather or the white space.
That's right. To start with, if you don't mind taking a minute or two to tell the audience who you are and what you do and what your background is.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So my name's Iain. I feel quite lucky in terms of ICT. What do I mean by that? So my point north has always headed towards ICT, and from a later point, AI. And inevitably data centers. So when I was 6-7 years old, my father was an electrician and was asked to bring in additional cables for a major retail bank in the United Kingdom. Very small scale at the time, and someone contacted them and said, we're going to move away from pen and paper. And that was my first adventure into data cabling. 7 years old, sitting on top of a proprietary server for a major bank. My journey then went on with that, with time domain refluxometers and playing with them in the house with thin wire loops around the garden as we were testing for resistance failures and stuff like that. And so data cabling has always been part of my life from a very, very early age. Went off to uni and wanted to do psychology. Didn't quite get the grades that I wanted. So a lesson that we can always still move on from these setbacks. And spoke to a really cool guy from California who was then in the UK and got into cognitive science. Didn't know much about it, but it sounded good. Turned in that I was actually signing up to do 3 years of the philosophy of AI and mind and consciousness and where the soul resides and how we replicate that into digital programs. At the time of completing that in 1998, little relevance to the world apart from being a good subject to bore people with, becoming much more relevant now. So came out of that, went back into the professional world with data cabling. Very proud to have carried on that relationship with the bank I mentioned earlier, to the point of being the UK sort of account manager for One LAN for sort of 600 of their branches. And then eventually got headhunted into data centers, which at the time were a black art that I thought I knew a lot about data cabling, having done it for 20 years. And data centers were always something on the periphery that you never really looked at. I was much more hospitals, shopping centers, very large projects, sometimes larger than data centers, and then came into the world of data centers about 5 years ago. So since then, I've worked at a colo owner, a major GC, and a fit out specialist. So we're very privileged to work with a lot of the major hyperscalers and see the amazing technology that goes into data centers. And it's one of those things that I think you never realize it's there until you realize it's there. And then it's all you see.
That's an interesting background, the AI education, I'll call it, back in the 90s. For a lot of people, I think they think of AI as being a very recent innovation, but certainly as a concept, as a kind of computer programming more so than AI. It's been around for 50, 60 years at this point. But that gives you an interesting take on it as it's being implemented, that kind of philosophy behind it.
Oh, absolutely. I was very lucky to be invited to Project Dawn, which is in the University of Cambridge in England, which obviously will fluctuate, but at the time I visited was the world's fastest supercomputer. And they had a lovely time board, starting off with sort of Ada Lovelace as one of the pioneers of, working with Charles Babbage way back when, 100 years ago, and the machines, and then sort of getting into Turing and those sort of things. But yeah, it's changed dramatically what we visualize artificial intelligence is now, whereas back then can a machine beat a grandmaster at chess or convince someone in a conversation over a non-visual medium, that they are real. Whereas now we see media and things created that we cannot differentiate between real and AI. It's exponentially accelerated.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's exponentially is one of those things where for years, I mean, as an engineering student, you'd see the graphs and kind of see the numbers, but it was hard to internalize what does exponential growth mean. But I think people looking at AI generated video see what was generated a couple of weeks ago versus what was generated 6 months ago versus what was generated a year ago. I think that's, to me at least, a very tangible example. That's what exponential progress looks like.
Yeah, I mean, never more so have we. It's an overused word, and you're right. Over the period of time that something does that, it's not visible. But again, I was speaking to someone they were saying that they're now outstripping Moore's law, which was the sort of one of the classical engineering things of exponential improvement regarding sort of chips, the improvement of chips leading to the improvement of chips. And you're absolutely right. I mean, over the last 20 years, I still use it as an analogy that we've only had sort of tablets now for 14, 15 years. And to imagine now that something is not touchscreen is quite beyond us. And we've become so intrinsic to that digital landscape. I dropped something a couple of weeks ago, and I did Control Z in my head. It's hard to define, but my first reaction was to undo it. And it's almost like we've become so reliant on data, ergo data centers, which then leads us on to ergo infrastructure and that everything that sits behind it.
So you have that great background starting very early in the data world and working your way in. But as AI now is becoming a data center technology, how's that changed and impacted what you do in your daily job?
That's a great question, Mike. I think, again, as you referred to, people think that AI is a new thing, the same as they think that data centers are a new thing. They're not as new as people think. But what I've found personally, going through the different tiers of working in the industry, is that a plateau had sort of been reached, and people had climbed this mountain and got, yeah, we know what a data center looks like. And there was a lot of talk about blueprints and Lego building, and I was a big believer of that. What have we seen recently with the changes? Well, any change brings change. And where we had maybe found a small haven of, I hesitate to use the word safety, of stable build where you could picture what a data center would be, some of us would be able to sit down and draw it out on a piece of paper to a level. I'm not sure we can do that anymore. Is, like you say, is changing almost weekly. So where we had more of a snapshot of what was coming in the future and how that would transpire with a 2-year build program leading up to any major construction project, you'd be able to say, yeah, in 2 years, I think it will look like this. I don't think any of us can predict what something's going to look like in 2 years now. That is what has changed because, again, it's the wrong word, but undermined ability to forecast. And that brings a lot of challenge, complication, and opportunity and excitement for people in the industry on how we maximize out on that potential.
Yes, certainly. I was talking about in an earlier conversation in the series about how data centers are still data centers. So to a certain extent, they still do what they've always done. But one of the changes I see now is there's a lot more conversations that I have with different disciplines. Like you said, it kind of plateaued and there was an expectation. I kind of knew what the cooling and power guys were going to do. It didn't really impact me, and what I did didn't impact them. So even though we were both in that same physical space, we didn't have to deal with each other. That's not the case anymore. Now changes are happening so fast. I'm not exactly sure what the power cooling guys are going to be doing. And I have, sometimes it can have a significant impact on what I'm doing and vice versa. So I have to have somehow those conversations, whether it's directly or through intermediaries.
Yeah, totally. I think it's an interesting one because we've got two industries that are growing in tandem. We've got data centers maturing in terms of this continual growth cycle lessons, the continual data feedback of a very high quality within existing data center in their digital environment, so the BMS, EPMS, DSOS, and how they can be built better. And then we've also got construction maturing. It's still an industry that struggles. I think everyone recognizes that. It'll be interesting how those two will come together on a path, because to take that data and facilitate that into an engineering build will require a mature construction industry as well to have that pre-construction ability to look ahead. And I think that's really exciting because the offshoot of that might spill out into other significant projects and how they can be improved upon.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, progress comes from problems, how people fix problems. And as an industry, we work on best practices and circle the wagons around the solutions that seem to be whatever, the most efficient or the most repeatable. That's ultimately where standards come from. In the meantime, like with I'll say lack of standards, or at least lack of specific relevant standards in some of these activities, how are you dealing with that? How do you mentioned kind of that construction expertise and needing that construction expertise to match up with the architecture expertise. What is it that you do to deal with that?
The industry's got a lot of tools, and I think we have been, we're seeing a lot of development within BIM, digital twins. I'm a big advocate of the McLeany curve. If any of our listeners haven't seen that, it's definitely worth looking at on how to design something on a bit of paper will be significantly easier than to build it and then try and redesign it. And we've got all these digital tools, but it comes back to the human factor, which always is quite reassuring to me that people look at AI, especially in the modern workplace, they're scared of jobs and stuff. But the real crux of the matter is human collaboration. And you cannot overcome some of the grey areas and ambiguities that need fixing without literally sitting down with someone and just going, I can do this much and it looks like you can do that much, and there's a gap in between us. How can we help each other? And that's still that's why I get up in the morning to do sort of my job. And I think that's still quite an exciting space. And while it's not evident or obvious to people looking at this digital landscape, that human problem solving and collaboration is hugely important. And that's how I feel that we bridge those gaps still.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, certainly when you watch the news or listening to any form of media, there's a lot of fear that AI is either directly or indirectly going to take over people's jobs or ruin certain things. At the end of the day, it's a tool the same as any other tool. I think of the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, or the Nobel Prizes in general. That was kind of a guilt complex from Alfred Nobel. He invented dynamite, for mining applications, and it turned into a weapon. He didn't feel too good about that. But AI becomes a tool, and it doesn't replace, to me, human ingenuity. There still has to be oversight, and there still has to be collaboration for people to look at that and say, yeah, that makes sense. Same as any other conversation between two people. Somebody could say something creative, could be creative, may not apply. It takes some conversation to happen to make sure things are applied appropriately.
Absolutely. I always see, and again, we talked about visible growth earlier in the discussion, and having been someone who's sort of been through computers from before they didn't exist to, a Sinclair, to a Commodore, to an Atari, to the beasts that we have now that are prevalent in the shop that can do almost anything. I've also seen a really tangible change in AI applications over literally the last couple of months. I mean, part of that is I swapped my phone, and it came with a whole new host of things that were mind-blowing, to be honest. And then we've obviously had other applications released by nearly every major player. And I very much see them as an exoskeleton for people's mental ability. I could do it on my own, probably, if I had to, but I don't need to be on my own. And the AI can really help sort of boost people. And I think that's the way I see it. It's like a digital friend who will help you up. But yeah, the human collaboration is still key. And I think that the AI is very clever, but it can't predict the future yet. So we still need that human intuition to look ahead and go, this is where the market's going. This is what we think we're going to be doing. And again, that comes from communication.
So if we circle it into, kind of the physical infrastructure, whether that's cabling, cooling, trays, whatever, the layout of the data center, what do you see as being the significant changes that you're dealing with as opposed to what you dealt with, say, 5, 6, 7 years ago?
The changes are twofold. We've just spoken about collaboration, but I have also seen a small sense of reticence to commit to firm designs because people don't know what they need to do in terms of they've got this project that's coming from 2 years ago, and it's like holding off on that left or right, the decision until the very last moment. That does have a knock-on effect. Sometimes we're seeing the infrastructure being under-designed. Sometimes we're seeing the infrastructure being over-designed. So that's one angle that we're seeing, where that's covering more of that level of uncertainty that does need that human collaboration. In terms of the actual physical, we're seeing huge amount more density within the white space. The level of connectivity in there is now astounding. I wouldn't want to give the listeners figures because they're probably incorrect by now, but I did sit in a forum about 12 months ago. So again, it's probably changed rapidly since then. But with some of the new HPC servers, where they can act in a more redundant array of inexpensive disk configuration in a rack cluster, where copper was pretty much dismissed in the white space as you'd have it for a wireless access point or a BMS temperature sensor, etc. All of a sudden, there was potential for a 15-meter long hack to have nearly 1,000 copper cables on it. I think I did the calculation in the forum, but if we're at Cat 6A or Cat 7, we were up to significant weights. And you start thinking, well, actually, you've designed your whole structural ceiling, your framework. Someone then comes along and says, that's great, I've got all my liquid cooling or whatever cooling they've decided to go with. But the project's going to fall over because we never looked at the basket and we never looked at the cable doing this interlink. And it makes it even more important to literally drill down into every aspect of the build. That's the thing that I'm seeing the most, is when you ask that question and go, yeah, we're building this, but what's it for? It's for some servers. What do those servers need? And almost reverse engineer back from those. And I think that was one of the most shocking changes. Not shocking is too strong a word. Where the most different changes, where I came into data centers, they're like, no, everything you know about copper, very copper centric from the retail market, it's all fiber. And then I did see this swing back to copper. So yeah, I'm not saying that that's going to be a way forward, but it's just, you've got to look at everything. And also the level of connectivity that we're seeing, that everything with the SLAs from contracts and the uptime requirements that are sacrosanct, everything is monitored. Everything has a cable. And that's becoming incredibly a complex and important infrastructure.
So based on all of that, there's people listening to this podcast, hopefully, many people listening to this podcast. What advice do you have for companies that are thinking about now planning their next data center?
For me, the key one, humbly, to anyone looking at a data center, I mean, obviously there'll be some hyperscalers that have got years of experience, but we are seeing a lot of investment funding coming into the market. Choose your partners and work with them. The model of pushing stuff back and the design and contract design portion doesn't help in those instances. It's from everyone, for every stakeholder, what are they going to build? Because you can't build half a car, half a motorbike. It's got to be one or the other, unless it's a trike. But that's built intentionally. But it's getting those people in early and using that expertise. I don't think we use the industry expertise. We certainly don't call in manufacturers. It's always one of my passions. If someone's going to talk to me about brand of cabling, let's talk to that company. They're the experts. They're people live and breathe it. Again, reaching out to those human stakeholders who are part of your wider supply chain and team and taking them on the journey with you. If you do that, there's not much we can't build collectively as a group.
Yeah, all right, good stuff. Any other topics that you think we missed that you think people would be interested in hearing?
There's one last one that I think always shocks people a little bit, is the level of wastage that we still have in construction. And there is this perception that data centers are not necessarily construction. They are construction. They're construction with services. Everything from them, from the concrete that gets poured, to the steel structure that goes in, to the cladding, to the doors, to the Vesta systems, to the mechanical yards, the electrical yards, the diesel generators, it's all construction. And through rework and not always getting that collaborative design correct, whichever package that might be, in the UK alone is estimated at about £25 billion worth of work a year redone. 25 billion. I mean, that's probably similar to the amount of money that's spent on data centers as a whole. And the UK industry construction industry is spending that on rework. So I think there's a huge opportunity for us to embrace AI, but be human collaborators.
Yeah, interesting. I think that relates a bit from my standpoint. I participate in some of the standards making bodies. And again, the pace of change, it's kind of a catch-22. There's this pace of change that's happening so quickly to implement high-performance compute data centers that will deliver AI resources. But at the same time, we're trying to get standards to catch up. It's going to take a little bit. But hopefully, when the dust settles a little bit, people have time to take a breath. That's 25 billion is a very, very big number.
Uh-huh.
And there's all kinds of things that go into, whether it's waste and rework or just resource utilization. That's a big target, hopefully, for everybody in the industry to pay attention, because it is a big user of resources, the data center industry. So we should be trying to be as efficient as possible with all of the materials that we're using.
Absolutely. No, totally agree.
All right. Thank you, Iain. I appreciate your time. And thanks, everybody, for listening. Until next time, it's Mike Connaughton signing off.
Beyond Bandwidth is a podcast series produced by Leviton Network Solutions. For more information on the topics we talked about today, as well as other enterprise or data center network infrastructure content, or to check out all available episodes of Beyond Bandwidth, visit us on the web at leviton.com/beyondbandwidth, or wherever you normally listen to podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd appreciate you leaving an honest review in your podcast application. Along with word of mouth, leaving a review will help others find our show. I'm Roy Chamberlain, and this was Beyond Bandwidth. Until next time.